All right, just real quick, my job for Connexon is basically to help support the teams. Okay, and I'm going to go through some things that we do with it and how I support them. We look at obviously the data, but then how that relates to what you're trying to do with them for either assessments, training, return to play, no matter what it is. That's what we're trying to do. So we'll be focusing a lot on conditioning, recovery, and assessments throughout these four-part series. So just real quick on myself, um, since most of you have probably don't know who I am, I'm in the background most of the time. I work just with the teams. In my last 10 years with the NBA, basically, I'll take the game data, which used to be from SportView, and now it's Second Spectrum data, and then ingest that with the Connexon data for practice. So now I can truly look at game and practice the same way. We can use the same XY coordinates. So I can then now in our Connexon platform, I can look at the game data that's coming in and look at the practice data and match it up. When we talk about some of our loads that we're going to go through here, I can match them up for the first time. Started that about 3 years ago with Connexon. So my background is metabolics. I worked for Athletes Performance. Many of you might know it now as Exos. I was there for over 10 years with Mark Sagan, and my job was to design all the energy system programs and assessments. So I'm bringing a lot of that knowledge into now working with the teams. I work with the athletes one-on-one, small groups like you guys do for many years. Now I'm working more with the coaches and stuff, and that's what I'm doing for Connexon. We're also starting to bring this into college basketball. So we have some college basketball teams using the Connexon system, which is actually nice because they can wear that in-game as well. So now I have the exact same system in-game and in practice. Just started doing a little bit more with USGA. I've been part of their sports science committee for the last 5 years. So for tennis, they actually use Hawkeye data in the matches, which you guys probably have seen where they're tracking the ball, but we're actually tracking the player as well. And I use the Connexon data at their Orlando training center to match it up so we can understand, all right, am I actually playing like I practice? Or the other way around, am I practicing like they actually play? The demand's really meeting for each, and we're going to talk a lot about that in these series. We also just started doing this in the NFL as well. We have some sites that Connexon has for NFL practices, but we're also taking in the Zebra data for game data, and we can come up with actual scenarios on loads as well as production from different players. Again, I'll go through that a little bit more. So that's how Connexon is woven into all of this, is that we use their data and we match it up to whatever game data the league might be using at that time, because we know the leagues change all the time. So we want to make sure that we can match up in the background. So that's what Greg and I do on a daily basis, working with the teams. So this one is looking at load management, because it's a buzzword now. Everybody's talking about. Okay, and so we really want to discuss that in our first series here, and then we'll go and like I said, the second series a little bit later this afternoon will be going on what to do with the data. So before I go any further, I just want to talk about what 4 areas I focus on in season with the teams. Again, the loads is a huge portion of that. Okay, we need to have those understanding of the loads and intensities that we'll be talking about today, but that's only one piece of it. But we've got to get that piece and then add to it, how do we use this in an assessment? Or how do I have assessments to help me understand those loads? Okay, if are the loads, can a guy handle certain loads? We need assessments to determine that, because right now the loads are just numbers. Can this guy handle it? Examples would be like, especially a few years ago with someone like LeBron James. LeBron James, we had this metric of mechanical load that I'll be talking about. We had flagged for most of the people in the NBA that if they hit a 1,400 mechanical load in a day, okay, we'd flag that. LeBron James would hit that all the time, so we had to flag him like 1,600. So what we need to do is be able to understand that, and using different types of assessment will understand those loads better. So it's not just a set number for everybody. Again, we'll talk about that. We also use it for our training as well. Understand how to design conditioning programs based on the true demands of the sport. Okay. And then huge one for me is recovery treatments. That's why we have another whole talk on recovery, because based on the loads that you have that day, how do I prepare you for the next day? I need to understand how I'm going to recover you, your treatment, so I can perform the next day. Because I'm not ever going to tell you to reduce minutes. I'm not going to tell you to get them off the court. I'm going to see how I can repair them, recover them, get them ready for the next session that they need to do. So recovery is a major part. So when I'm talking to teams, it's not just about the data, it's how we use the data in other parts of it. As we go through this, if you have questions and stuff, there is a Q&A tab on your screen that you can send me questions. Greg's going to be monitoring that for me as well, so we'll have some questions at the end, or you can raise your hand and I'll be able to see you here and I can call on you at the end. But definitely, I want this to have some questions and interaction at the end. So starting off with load management, again, buzzword. This is something I found, I did a talk in December at a biometrics conference, and I used this slide, so I thought I'd throw it in there. So this came out in November. It wasn't my quote, okay? They were quoting, if Michael Jordan believes NBA players are paid to play 82 games, he's extremely wrong. Well, again, coming to my thought process of conditioning the guys as well as recovering the guys, I want to get as close to 82 games as possible. Okay? And there are guys that can handle 82 games. And there's other ones that can't because of injuries and the way that they're going to return to play slowly. Sometimes back-to-backs they're off. I understand all of that. But the ultimate goal is to play as many games as possible, like Michael says. All right, I'm with Mike on that. My goal is to try to get you on the court as much as possible. That being said, let's go into what we're really trying to do here. The key to all load management is good data. That's the most important thing. So again, that's why I work with Connexon, so I can pull in the game data from whatever source it is into the platform with Connexon, match it up with my practice data. I need good, reliable data, repeatable data every single time. This picture is a corner of my closet right next to me right now, and you can see I've tested everything. Okay, companies will send me things to test out. I'll first test it on myself or on my daughters. They're the first guinea pigs, and then if I think there's something there, I'm going to give it to a team and say, hey, here, try this out. Tell me what you think. They know I'm not there trying to sell anything to them. I am trying to get good data for them, trying to find additional ways to get good data to enhance what we have at the Connexon level right now. We're trying to enhance it. So the team doesn't like it, they throw it away, no big deal. What I'm going to do, I'm going to find something else. So that's the one thing you got to do. You've got to test things out. There's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of stuff that's very misleading as well. So understand what you're looking at. That's the most important thing. That's why we test things. I give it to teams to test. If it doesn't work out, we go on to the next one. So a lot of the stuff in my closet right now are things that didn't make it. So this screen here is very ugly and very messy, and that was designed, okay? Because that's the problem with training loads out there right now. It's very messy. It's very crowded, right? Everybody's trying to talk about all these load management stuff, but do they truly understand what the load management is, right? In this case here, there's a lot of talk about acute to chronic ratios, and there's papers out there. I had the pleasure, not this past year, but because we obviously not having a combine right now, but in the past NBA combine, I was on a panel with Tim Gabbett, who started, made popular the acute to chronic. So a very good discussion throughout the day, and it was very clear. It's like, Paul, people have misunderstood my paper. It was supposed to be something to start with, and then you got to make adjustments on it. It's not set in stone. But he's the first one who will tell you have to make adjustments and truly understand what acute to chronic is. We're going to talk a little bit about that in this series as well, but it's not just a set number and these numbers that we're showing up here and all these graphs. they're not just set numbers. You have to adjust. Each player is going to be a little bit different. Definitely in the league, the NBA versus college basketball, what metrics we're going to use and how we're going to look at acute to chronic is completely different than what I'm going to look for the NFL in college football. And definitely even different more individual sport like tennis and the USTA. So there is no set. We have to find out what best works for you, and you make adjustments not just for you, but then also for your players. So I want to make sure we understand that this is a moving target, and everybody's going to be starting off different. I do understand on this call right now, we got 30 some people on this call, and I know some people have some technology and just starting out with it. Some people don't even have technology yet, just trying to understand what is out there and how they would use it. Then we have some guys on here from the NBA. Some of my friends are on here that they're listening in. They have been using this, but they're looking for the next level. What's after this? Where are we going with this? So don't worry, if you haven't done anything yet at all, then we're going to talk about that level all the way up to, how do we take it to the next level? So. All right, quickly in my history of the loads management out there, I've been doing training loads for a very long time. Back when I was at Athletes Performance, we did, we measured everything. And we started off back then with just simple trims. Trim score, if you're not familiar with trim score, you can Google it, all right? Just Google trims. And basically what trims is, sorry, button too fast. Basically what trims is based off of heart rate. All we're looking at is how much time that you are at a certain heart rate zone, and you get credit for that. So if you're a very low heart rate zone, you're going to get a few credits for it. At the higher heart rate zones, you're going to get more credits for it, meaning a cumulative load over time. So if you look at this graph here, if this was a heart rate graph, this gray down here, this is probably very low intensity. You see that the slope is very slow, very flat here. So they're probably not at a very high heart rate if we're using heart rate in this case. But over time, when you have a high spike like this one here, a huge increase like this, that's probably for a very short period of time, they have a very high heart rate. So in this case here, the trim score is going to be much higher. So trim scoring is heart rate, and we get a cumulative load from it. Really basic, use it with any heart rate monitor out there. It's a good place to start. You don't even have a heart rate monitor with no one, RPE, okay? Rate of perceived exertion, a 1 to 10 scale, 1 to 5 scale, whatever type of scale that you like, that's a good place to start. And all you're doing is using that scale, multiplying by the minutes that they're actually working out, and you're going to get a good estimate of that load. Okay, so both trims and RPE are very basic ways to start off getting a load for your client. We use it even now, even in tennis. We've tracked 2 tennis players for an entire season. And we got really interesting information to go along with the cumulative loads that we were getting on the Kinexon and the Hawkeye. We could actually see exactly how did they feel? How did it feel? How do these adjust to those loads? So RPE, even when you're using other technology, RPE is still good to have as a good reference. Right? Get a feedback from your client, how they feel. We actually do this sometimes with the coaches as well. How do the coaches think this practice was? And then compare that to the team. There's a lot of great research on it. Now, there are pitfalls with the RPE. What the biggest pitfall is that get to a certain level, some of the athletes just don't give you a real answer. Okay, on a 1 to 10 scale, I'll get a 10 every single day from guys. Basically, what they're telling me is like, I work hard every day. Don't want anybody to see that they're not working hard. So they'll give me a 10 every single day. Or the other guys on a 1 to 10 scale, they'll give me a 5 every day. It's the same every day. Same workout every day. So that's the pitfalls of it. But if you get some people who really buy into it, and you get good feedback, you got some good information, and that goes along really well, even with the technology that you're using, because you want to see, right, how do they actually feel? How are they recovering? Another way of looking at loads is through distance. All right. How I use this, again, when I was training the athletes in the small groups, I tracked everything I did. Okay, my job, again, energy systems, was the conditioning guy, right? I would take guys out to do their conditioning. We have a wide variety. We have 5 phases of ESD that we have. And again, that's in one of our talks. I'll go in more detail, the 5 phases. but I would track everything they did. So if I would say we're going to do some 300-yard runs today, I knew it's 300s. I then am recording the time, so I have time and distance. There's my work. That's my workload right there. I know what their time was and I know what their distance was. That gives me the work for the day. All right. So I could understand, all right, are they progressing? Are their times getting better? Okay. If their times are starting to get slower, that's starting to tell me that maybe we're overtraining. Okay. We're to a point that this person is fatigued. Simple things like that is load management as well. Did load management every day in my ESD sessions. It could be on a walk bike, on a VersaClimber, whatever it was. I'm looking at wattage, I'm looking at heart rate recovery, and I'm looking at time. So all of those will give me how much workload I'm doing. So that's simple ways to get even workload. Then at AP, we in 2005 we ran into a company called Zephyr. Okay, Zephyr, I'm not even sure if they're still around. They might be under another name now. They're the first ones that actually came out with a heart rate strap and accelerometer on it. Right. So again, normal chest strap that you saw, a little bit bigger, but it had accelerometer. So give me a little bit more information. And we created two metrics back then. We created a physio load and a mechanical load. Our physio load was again closer to the trim score. It was really based off of heart rate in that case. And then our mechanical load was based off the accelerometer, though. We were looking at the amount of movement that the athlete was doing and the intensities of it to give us a mechanical load. So that was way back in 2005. So since then, we've progressed. All right. Now there's new technology. Right. People started using GPS. Now we've actually gone to a little more advanced. We're looking at more RFID type of training. We're looking at the optical training in the cameras. So we're looking at it more detailed than we had before. Instead of just a heart rate and an accelerometer, now what we have is an accelerometer with an RFID chip. Okay, so that's what we have in the Connexon. Is we're tracking the player. So it's not just the accelerometer. Now we're actually tracking XYZ coordinates, so I can truly get the distance, and I can get speeds. From there, I can create true physio loads and mechanical loads. Okay, for the players. Now our physio load. Talk about this a little bit more in the next slides as well. But our physio load is more distance, body weight, and speed. Okay, mechanical load is that accelerometer, but we're looking at accelerations and decelerations, and we weight those. So you can see how we took the Zephyr physio load, mechanical load, and enhanced it a little bit more when we got more technology into it. All right. The next step, well, how do we take a Connexon type of product and enhance it a little bit more? Start looking at the data, maybe at the foot level. Okay? So we've been looking at different accelerometers that you can put inside the shoe, not on top of the shoe, but inside the shoe, insole. And actually, that's what this graph is right here. And basically, what we can get from that is true G-forces. So now we have a good physio load, mechanical load. But now we can actually get another load, which is a little truer. There's no algorithms in it. It's a baseline one based off of just G-forces and asymmetry. I got the right and the left. So that's where we're going with Connexon. Is we're not just going to be happy with what we have. We keep looking at how do we enhance it as well. So that's where things are going. And that's how they progress from simple trim scores, RPE, that's where you might be right now. Your conditioning, just use distance. But now how do we add in more technology, heart rate, accelerometers. Now we're going to do tracking. So very important how we're going to progress. So going over the loads that we use and talking about where we're going to go in the next a day or two with this workshop series. Our mechanical load, mentioned it before. This is something that we have used a lot. Greg and I have torn it apart. We tear it apart every few years and try to improve it based off of accelerations and decelerations, like I mentioned before, but it's a weighted. So what I've done is basically the trim score that I talked about before, how much time you are in different zones. In this case, it's acceleration threshold, deceleration threshold, how much time you're in those. That's how we add up to get you a mechanical load. So really what that is the load on the legs. So how many stops and starts you get, but the intensity. So we weight the accelerations higher as they would give you more load weighting as they have a higher accelerations, but we even give you higher numbers for decelerations because we know there's a lot more work, a lot more load on the legs to decelerate. So that's what we're trying to do there is get a good picture of how much work is on the legs. That's mechanical load. Accelerations, decelerations, weight, stops and starts. Our physio load. Physio load is speed, distance covered by a player, and we use body weight as well. Now, people ask all the time, why are we using body weight? Okay, why won't we just use distance? I had this distance, that's fine. But the reason I like to use body weight, we add to it to our physio load, is because I want to give credit to a big guy. All right, let's just say you have a guard and you have a forward that cover the same distance, total distance in a game. All right, they're both 2.2 miles that they've covered in a game. All right, but that forward weighs 50 pounds more than that guard. So I want to give that forward credit, understanding how much work that he really did. Because why am I doing this again? Because I am going to use this to help me my recovery treatment. If it's just straight distance, I would say, okay, my recovery probably for this guard and that forward would be the exact same because the distance was the same. Really, could be that we have to make some adjustments because of the size of this guy. Maybe he needs extra treatment. Maybe he needs extra treatment in different parts on his legs because he's carrying 50 pounds more. So that's why our physio load includes the body weight. Some people, again, still just like to look at distance, that's fine. But it connects on, we like to break down our metrics, mechanical load and physio load. Those are our mainstay ones because we add a little bit more to it. We have the weighted sum in the acceleration, deceleration for mechanical load instead of just straight counting accelerations, deceleration. We weight them. Physio load, we add body weight. So that's how we've enhanced them so we can look a little bit deeper into a player. That's what you want to start thinking about. If we got good basic data of a number of accelerations, decelerations, we got good basic data of distance, where do you take it from there? And that's where we've taken it with mechanical load and physio load. Where are we going from there? We have another metric that we like a lot. It's called performance pace. Again, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the session that's coming up in about 2 hours, but also that session can repeat multiple times over the next few weeks. So if you can't make it today, there's other times to jump on. We talk about performance pace and basically in how fast does this player play? And we want to look at not just the speed that he runs and sprints up the court. I want to look at how much movement he has. Is this guy moved around a lot, or is he an efficient mover? What's really interesting with this performance pace, and had a great conversation with NBA coaches. We have a weekly call with the NBA coaches right now during this break, and we had a great call about the performance pace because what's interesting, talk about pace, these guys are fast, these guys move a lot. Well, guess what? The All-Stars actually have very slow performance pace. Why? Because they're efficient. They know when to take off. James Harden is one of the slowest performance pace guys in the league. Why? He goes to three-point line. He knows when to take off. He's very smart. LeBron James, same thing. He's got lower numbers. Not that they're not fast, they're not powerful. They are, but they are efficient. They know how to play. They know where to be, and they can take off when they need to. So that type of stuff. So we're looking at our data that we have, which is the mechanical load. We divide it by the minutes that they play. If this is an intensity number, that's part of performance pace. Then we look at high-end accelerations, and we look at just feet per minute they cover. So I'll talk a little bit more on that later on. Other ones we're going into is power and strength. Those are other metrics that we have are playing around with right now, Greg and I, and those things we'll be talking over the next couple sessions as well. But what I really wanted to get through on this slide here is that, yeah, we have some good basic data out there, accelerations and decelerations and distance, but what's the next step with them? We got to do more than just have those set numbers. We have to come up with how do we actually make it look and understand the player a little bit more. So we'll talk about that a little bit later today as well. Now, just switching over to acute to chronics and our red flag. So how do we use these loads? That's what we're talking about here. So I have my physio load and my mechanical load here. Right? So We do have an acute to chronic here. When I use acute to chronic, though, in the NBA right now, we're 7 to 14. The normal acute to chronic or base one that Tim Geba put out there is 7 to 28. We found in the NBA 7 to 14 works a little bit better, and the reason that we did that is because if my whole goal in the NBA is to get you to the playoffs. If you get to the playoffs, you've got to outplay them in games 6 and 7. So if you look at that, if you went to a game 7 in the playoffs, that's roughly 14 days. I want to see how do you perform in that 14-day period. So that's why we use a 14-day opposed to 28, because that's a very key time frame for us. Is if we have to play a 6 or 7 game series, that means it's a very close series, very high intensity. So what we need to do is make sure, can we last? That's why our acute to chronic is more 7 to 14. But I really focus on 1 day and 3-day trends. Okay, 1 day spike, 3-day trends. So if we look at these physio loads that I have on the screen right now, you can see that these last 3 days are red. What this is telling me, I look quickly at our the Connexon platform here. I can see very quickly that these 3 days were 1 standard deviation above this player's norm. Okay, that's why they're flagged. Okay, it was because of time he played a lot more minutes in this case as well, but he also had a very high physio load and a high mechanical load. What's interesting in this case is also we look at that intensity. Remember, I mentioned intensity before. Intensity is just the mechanical load divided by the minutes played. Okay, that's all we're doing here is dividing the minutes into this mechanical load to get this intensity. How intense was it for him to get this 1400 load? That's basically what we're looking at. Did I get this 1400 load? In this case, it was 36 minutes, or did I get it in 26 minutes? That would mean this intensity is even higher. Okay, I got that load very quickly. That's a lot of work on the legs in a short period of time. So that's why intensity is very important. Something we'll be talking about over this series as well. And this is green. What green means, this is actually above, for intensity-wise, above his standard deviation as well. So this game was really hard for him. Actually, these 2 games were very hard for him, meaning that he had a high loads as well as high intensity. So back to the whole reason I'm doing this is to make sure that we're looking at this to help his recovery treatment. In these games here, he only had 1 game in between. I hope we adjusted his recovery treatments because he came back and did it again the next day. Okay, so we really need to pay attention. That's what we use this data for, is to really make sure that our recovery treatments are on par. All right, so it makes us a very quick look. Standard deviation, we have, like I mentioned before, 1 day spikes as well. I mentioned that with LeBron James earlier, and we have certain numbers here that we look at for 1 day, but we're really concentrating on that 3-game trend. Okay, so, and then we'll add to the 14-day after that. So from there, what I want to do real quick is go into the platform, and I want to show you a couple things in the Connexon platform. So looking at this here, this is an actual, this is actual data that we put in. We took the names out. It's an actual data from players. And what I do in the platform is I look at the team red flag. All right. This is overall team. And there's no red flags. I showed you just a second ago on the screenshot. I showed you the 3 red flags. Here, you don't see anybody flagged. So load-wise, because this is load only, we have distance in high-speed zones, we have that mechanical load I talked about. Nothing's flagged here. If I go into the next one, now I'm going to look at the same players, same time frame, but you see I'm looking at intensities now. Some intensity numbers, mechanical intensity, accelerations per minute in the high zone, physio intensity. These have been flagged, okay? So basically what I'm saying is now I need to take a look at player number 3, player number 6 a little bit more, because something is flagged here. So if I go into the player red flag, we're going to go to number 6 that we just talked about. So again, in the platform, real quick, I get all the detailed data on this one player, right? So the team one told me who to go look for, and now I can go look at that player. So before I had everybody listed there, I'd have to go through one at a time. But platform, because we're using our flag system, 3-day flag system, it is flagging to tell me who I should be looking at. So that's the beauty of it. It makes it very simple. And you can see here, this is flagged because we have some mechanical intensity. All right, we had 3 practices and games in a row that were low. You need to take a look. All we're really trying to do with this is, hey, we need a conversation. Is there a reason that it's lower here? It could be because of the practices, but then we have a game that's low as well. We have another game that's low. Mechanical intensity is low. So, hey, are we practicing like we play? Those are the things. What we're doing here is basically with the red flag system is bringing up questions for you. All right, things for you to look for. We're not telling you that there's something wrong. We're saying, hey, there's just something here to look at. Maybe that should be a discussion with a player. Is it fatigue? Is it some kind of a lower body injury? We've seen this before. It's like, okay, the guy can't explode anymore because he's got tightness in the calf. Not enough to keep him out, but maybe something that we need a little extra treatment for. So this red flag would just tell us to have that conversation with the player. Again, I'm not telling you to pinch somebody. I'm not telling you to. In fact, I'm saying have a conversation. That's what our system really does. So we're going to take a look at one other guy. Player 26 real quick. And the reason that we'll use 3, especially when we're looking at game data only, because it could be matchup as well. It could be just your opponent slowed him down. That's fine. So there's really nothing wrong. And so lots of times when I flag something, I'll say something to a coach, they'll turn to me and tell me, oh, I know what that is. Perfect. That's great. Sometimes they'll also say, oh, I'm not sure why that was down. Maybe we should take a look at that. So what we're really trying to do here is look at the loads and intensities for a player over time and looking at to see what they are, how they're handling that period of time. So in this case here, just refresh the screen really quick, and you can see that in his games, this player's player number 26 now, okay? In his games, his total distance or flagged compared to any of his practices. So he's covering a lot more ground in games than he's practiced. That could be good this time of year. Yes, you might be pulling back of the practices. That's what I want. Or what you really want to do is go back at the beginning of the year. It's like, hey, did I ever get that load up there? In this case, distance is a load. Did I ever get that up there so he has the work capacity to handle this? So just trying to play around with it. That's why we're using the flag system here. But you can see his intensities have been down. All right. And is it because of these games? I don't know. Again, flagging this, giving us the conversation, look deeper into the player, but that's what the system will do. Very simply, give us something to take a look at, understand where the questions should be. So if we go back into the PowerPoint, I'm going to finish up here. A few more things to go over before we will take some questions at the end. But so other terms that I want to discuss real quick, right? Intensity management and productive loads. What I'm really asking about in these, are we in shape for the demands of the sport? That's the one question that I always have throughout the season, and it can be any sport that I'm dealing with. Okay, my football guys say the exact same thing to me as the basketball and hockey. It's like, all right, are we staying in shape or are we getting out of shape during the season? Because of the schedule, because of the workload, because of travel, whatever it might be, are we still in the same shape that we want to at the end of the season? Because that's obviously the most important is the playoffs, tournaments, whatever we're looking for. At the end of the season, that's what we want to be peaking for. So we want to be able to look at some data to make sure that's exactly what we're working on. One way to look at intensity management is this is an example of a basketball player preseason. Okay, the blue lines here are physio load. The red lines are mechanical intensity. So quickly again, physio load, basically this is distance with their body weight calculated in there. Mechanical intensity is that acceleration, deceleration weighted that I talked about, divided by minutes. Okay, so if you take a look going into these red circles are scrimmages, right? So going into the first scrimmage, you can see his loads are pretty high going into the first scrimmage. Intensities are fairly low, closer to the bottom part of the red. So what we have here is this red is a standard deviation, okay, for intensity. The blue is the standard deviation for loads for him. So that's individualized for each player. He's in that zone. He's right in the blue shaded area, so no problem with loads. It's not like they're too high. Intensities, again, not too high, not too low. Here's the scrimmage. Okay, loads, very high intensity in the scrimmage, though. Okay, a lot more stops and starts per minute than in any of the practices. Not a problem. Okay, we keep going on here. Now we have some more practices, but they're starting to taper down the load. As you can see, even this load here is actually below the standard deviation for physio load for him, so that's good. All right, intensity though went up a little bit. Okay, they dropped the loads down, but the intensity went up a little bit. You'll see in this scrimmage, it's the exact same, or very close to the scrimmage that he had before here. We have a little higher load, little lower intensity, but for the most part, it's the same. So, but the problem was this player who's had a history with a foot injury in the past aggravated his foot in this scrimmage. So the question that I have is, was it because of the intensity going into the scrimmage versus when he had these higher loads going into the scrimmage? All right, he handled the loads all right, but he didn't handle the stops and starts at a high intensity, very short periods of time with stops. Didn't handle that as well. So that brings up a question. Again, that's what the system's doing for me, is it's flagging things to say, hey, you know what, let's just take a look at it. That might be the issue. Let's make an adjustment from that point on in its training leading up to a scrimmage. So looking at two different metrics, looking at the intensity as well as the load over time, going to give you a lot more information than just that one load number that everybody's talking about. Load management, it's a lot more than just the load itself. So another one I'm going to talk about a lot more in the next series as well, is productive loads. I'm going to give you just a quick review of this one, and we'll talk about it in the next section a little bit more. So basically in this case here, what we have is mechanical load here on the bottom, and we have yards, so completed yards. These are wide receivers, so in the game. You take a look at this here, this player here, very high mechanical loads, working very hard, and average as far as production. All right, he's catching about 70 yards per game. All right, so pretty good. This guy here, very productive, over 100 yards per game, so a very productive player right here. Mechanical loads are also pretty high. He's the second highest one. So this guy's doing a lot of work, right? This guy here, mechanical loads similar to this one, but it's not very productive. Only catching just barely over 40 yards per game. These guys down here, not productive at all. Hardly any loads as well as production. So the question is, now when you start seeing all these wide receivers, first of all, are they training the same way? Okay, I'm hope this guy is training completely different than this DM guy over here. All right, is this what you're trying to get out of these guys? Are these guys more decoys? Are these guys more blocking? Maybe they're tight ends, whatever they are. So is this what you're trying to get out of them? So are they being as productive as what you're looking at? So those are things that you want to see over time. Tennis, we do the same thing, but we're looking, that is actually, you know, points after a long rally. So if you have a very long rally, how productive are they after that? Can they handle long rallies? That's what we're looking for. When we're looking at productive loads, that long rally, that long load on the body, can he handle that? And can he recover and handle it for the next point? So that's what we're looking at for productive loads there. Basketball, we're looking at PER. In the NBA, they use a player efficiency rating. That player efficiency rating is based on shooting percentages, rebounds, a lot of different metrics in there. So in that case, what we're looking for is how efficient are they with their mechanical load and their intensity. So over time, does the load start catching up to them and their PER drop? Or in some cases, we see this a lot with younger players as well. Eventually, the game starts slowing down for them. Their intensities actually start to slow down. And because of their slowing down, their PER is going up because they're being more efficient. Those are things that we'll talk a little bit more in the next session. So 3 takeaways from this that I'd like you to walk away with, and have questions here, definitely please raise your hand or send me a question on Q&A here. Also, in the next slide after this, and I'll let Jim jump back in after this slide as well. We'll have my contact information, Greg's contact information. I've had people email me since last Thursday, with questions. So if you don't have a question right now or you think about one, certainly can ask them later. But takeaways that I understand the different load metrics out there. Okay, make sure you're using the one that's right for your team. Right? There's different ones, and then how do you enhance it as well? Acute to chronic load settings. Okay, everybody's talking about this. There's lots of papers out on there. Okay, not set in stone. Okay, that's coming from the author. It's not set in stone. How do you want to use it? You need to make adjustments and try to figure that out. And look at more than one metric. Okay, it's not just load management that everybody's talking about. It's an intensities that you want to look at. Then it's going to be taking it to the next level. It's production. So I'm going to take this one question real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and then if we have more questions at the end. Given that sports are currently shut down and could be for a fast ramp up for athletes, we'll begin the season and the platform management, how we help to do that to prevent injury. That's a great question, and actually that's a question that's being posed this week in my MBA group. We've had a lot of interesting conversations with teams even from Germany. That's the other good thing. We connect on. We have it's a German company, so I have access to German leagues over there as well to talk about different performances and different scenarios. And obviously, what we have right now is that with this shutdown, this is completely different right now, and trying to understand how do we ramp them back up. So what we've been doing is having discussions with some German soccer teams because they have naturally most years a 3 or 4 week break at Christmas time before they go back into the second part of their season. So they have to slowly ramp them up as well. And what the guys were telling me with how they handle that, and then even again with the German league, is basically when their season ends at the beginning of summer, then they start back up at the end. It's not that big of a break. It's 6 to 8 weeks that they have there. That's a very short break compared to the most leagues out there. So they definitely, they really would be promoting right now, because it's been a while since this breaks it's gone, and it's going to be a little bit longer. Right now, they're actually telling the guys to do something other. If you're a basketball player, do anything but play basketball. That kind of sounds weird right now, but that's how they were talking about it. It's like the soccer players, they say, hey, don't play soccer right now. We just want you to stay active, but let's not play soccer. Okay? Maybe if you want to shoot around for basketball or something like that, a couple skill things, but not playing basketball. Right? Try to get away from that for a little bit. And then based on the assessments, teams have done assessments throughout the season. Could be force plate, but it could be more like movement assessments, because that's all they can do by Zoom right now. Looking at different ways to do some type of assessment on their athletes once they've started to understand when they're going to ramp back up. They want to take those assessments to determine, do you need to work more on your endurance right now? Do you need to work more on your speed right now? Or is it more functional that you need right now? So that would be the next phase of the ramp up. It's like trying to pick apart what is the weakness of that player right now. And then you'd get into a little bit more individual stuff for either soccer or basketball, whatever your sport is. So that's how they're talking about ramping it back up right now, unloading right now with different types of sport. Then they're going to go more specific based on what is the weakness of that athlete before they start introducing whatever drills they work. And now what we're going to do is go into a little bit more what we do with the data, and talking about different load managements and trying to understand how people use this and how we use it with our clients. So, to start it off, um, what I talked about in the first one is I just want to bring up again is that there's 4 areas of focus in season. Okay. And what we looked at and talked about in the first session was a lot more around just the player loads and the metrics. I'm going to review those quickly for us. But then other talks and how we work with our teams is that we really want to also look at the readiness of the fitness part, cardio fitness assessments for them, as well as training, as well as the recovery. So those are what we'll be talking about in the 4-part series. So it's much more than just talking about loads, load metrics. We're going to go deeper into what do they mean, how do we use them with the teams over the of the 4-part series. So as we get going here, if you have a question, probably the best thing to do is to send in the Q&A, and we will pick that up at the end, and I'll go through the questions and answer all the questions that I can in the amount of time that we have. So basically what I'm going to do is talk for about 30, 40 minutes here, and then we'll get into the Q&A at the end. So if you have any other, if you want to speak up at any point, you can also try raising your hands, and if I can, I'll call on you. But for the most part, what we'll do is try to keep all the questions to the end. So, okay, just a quick review of where we were in the first sessions, the load management. What I want to do is just talk about the intensities and load review, our mechanical load and our physio loads, and how we create the intensities. Again, mechanical load is accelerations, decelerations. I'm really focusing on when mechanical load, it's how much work is done on the legs, right? By blowing up the legs. And then when I divide it by the minutes, I can get the intensity and say, how hard did I blow up the legs in a period of time? Was it, I did that in a 10-minute period of time, a 20-minute period of time, how hard was it? So, and we have to look at that because when we're talking about this data now and how we're going to use it, we're really going to focus on that. It's like, are we actually doing the demands of the game in practice? So these intensity numbers are going to be very important to look at when we're discussing this during the season. So physio load again is our distance load, but we've added body weight to it. So with that being said, what we're trying to do is give credit to the big guys. I want to make sure that guys are working and we're addressing how much work that they're actually doing, accounting for their body weight as well. If I have a guard and a forward running the same distance in a game, I want to add the body weight of that forward, which could be 50, 60 pounds more, to adjust my recovery treatments for him. Understand how much work he has actually done. That's what we're doing there. Our flagging system that we talked about in the first session, we do a 1-day flagging. So that could be just if it's a very high load for that day, we just want to take a look at it. So it's something that we need to address. Our big one is the 3-day trend, showing that down here earlier. Is in our 3-day trend, what we're trying to do is we're looking for, in this case, these are games. Look, are there 3 games in a row that's there some change? In this case, high loads, mainly from high minutes. Those high loads, do I need to adjust the recovery treatments for that athlete because of these loads? And then we talked about acute to chronic, how we use a 7 to 14 acute to chronic in the NBA because it fits into our system for playoffs. Now you need to look at your acute to chronic. How does that fit into your sport and the demands of your sports for different parts of the season? So truly understanding the acute to chronic ratio that you need for your athletes, for your sport. So that's just a quick review on where we left off. So I want to get into this a little bit more on the game demands. All right. When I first started working, and again, if you were in one of the first sessions, we had talked about my background, and my background being metabolics, exercise physiology, and specialize in energy systems. And I did that for Athletes Performance, now known as Exos. Um, and what my big job there was for a long time was VO2 testing. I did thousands of VO2 tests every year. We had VO2 testing going on in every one of our locations because we had a system based off of that VO2 test. We could then get your estimated heart rate zones, and from the heart rate zones, as well as from the VO2 numbers, the fitness, I can then design a conditioning program for you, or at least know where I'm going to start. Because again, at a facility like Athletes Performance, guys would come in for 4 to 6 weeks. So I couldn't spend 2 weeks trying to figure out what their fitness level was. I need to know from day one so then I can get them into the right conditioning programs. That's where a lot of this came from. And then I got introduced to the camera systems in Europe when I was working still with AP, but for Adidas. And we're looking at what they're doing in soccer. And that's where a lot of this camera technology, the optical tracking came from, was um, in soccer. So we did that. So now I started looking at that. It's like, all right, I don't need a VO2 test. I can look at the true demands of the athlete in the game to determine my conditioning programs. And that's what I really want to talk about now. So my background, understanding the metabolic system as well as energy systems and going into designing programs from that. Now I'm doing it from RFID with the Connexon. I am doing it with the whatever game system that the leagues are using. So in the NBA, they're using Second Spectrum now. It used to be SportView. And so we had to understand how to take that data and dump it into Connexon and truly compare our game and practice data, right? So we're looking at the exact same thing. In the NFL, they use Zebra. What do? We take, again, some facilities are using a Connexon in practice, but we can marry the game in practice using that XYZ coordinates, all right, from a RFID system, optical systems. So that is the main goal, okay? So that's what we want to make sure that we're doing. So we're going to look at what the game demands are, and then in practices, are we actually meeting those demands? So if I give you a quick look at it right here, you could see that mechanical load that I just gave you a quick reference on before. Again, acceleration, deceleration, weighted, right? So we're going to look at how much work is done on the legs. You can see in section 51 in this example here, very high. It's red. That's my red flag, meaning that is a standard deviation over their norm. So in this case here, this is a session. Here's another session, okay? And here's a game down here. All right, the good news here is like, okay, we got some high loads in this game here, right? And we've actually can do that. We've done some in practice as well. So what we're really trying to do, it's like, okay, are my demands of the game, am I doing that sometimes in practice as well? We've got a few reds here in practice along with a game. We've got some games that are not as high. But again, we want to make sure we're at least addressing that. And in this case, we are. Some things that we need to might start looking at is that we got to pick it apart a little bit more. In this example here, I have over on the side, I'm showing high-speed distance, okay? High-speed distance. You see the reds in the high-speed distance? Again, standard deviation above their norm. These three here at the top, and then one down at the bottom, they're all games, all right? So the highest high-speed distance that I have are all games in this situation, right? So what we're looking at here is like, are we actually training them? Because there's no high speed distance, okay, in any of the practices. So are our practices actually matching up to their games? We have the loads, we're getting there, but now we're starting to pick it apart. We can actually start looking at jumps as well. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to go out of this and I'm going to go into our platform, similar to what I did in the last talk that we had. And I'm going to look at some real data in the platform. All right, so this is the Connexon platform. Again, I can pull in game data and practice data into one place, even if it's from different sources, and then compare it. I'm going to go down, going back to the raw data to actually do that. So I'm not using the metrics that are coming out of these other systems. I'm using raw data. So when I'm comparing a mechanical load in my system here in Connexon, I'm actually using the raw data from the Connexon practice and the raw data from whatever system's outside. So I'm using the same exact filtering system, and I'm using the same algorithms. So I know that they're going to match up, or as close as that you're going to be able to match up when you're going from an optical system into a RFID. We found to be very close. Again, we have the same filter, so we know it's going to be very similar. So in this case here, again, you see a bunch of red. But I'm actually breaking down this mechanical load a little bit different. This is where I want to talk about how we use this data. So if I have that mechanical load that we've been talking about, all right, here's a red day here. Okay, this is a game on January 28th. Okay, there was a very high mechanical load, right? He also had high mechanical load down here at another game, and he had another high mechanical load. This was 2 days before a game. Okay, this is a example of a college, so I don't have that must have been an away game here. There's been something here in between. That's why we don't have it. But in our case here, I have 3 high loads. Now, in that high loads, though, I want to break down that load. Right? I have buckets of low accelerations, medium accelerations, high accelerations, very high accelerations. And again, are my games and practices matching up? So if I just look at this here and I have a very high mechanical load game, you can see that most of that is coming from acceleration 1s and 2s, so low and mediums. Most of my accelerations are coming from that in this game. In my practices, though, you can see that I have not as many or lower numbers in these practices. So my high-end accelerations my low-end accelerations here are actually a little bit lower. They're not the same level. So do I have some? I have one right here, but it's the low one. But then what's interesting here is that in this practice here, which is 2 days before, I had a very high load. But where did a lot of my load come from? It came from the very high accelerations. Again, is that what we really needed 2 days before the game? Because it's not the same as what I have for a game. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I just want this. This is how we start picking it apart, and you start understanding what do you need to do. There's obviously different times of the season that you're going to have higher acceleration games, practices. Lower ones, you're going to be doing some different periodization. So it's not saying things are wrong with this. I'm just saying that we can take a lot more from this mechanical load and just say, here's your number and it's high. Let's just see where it came from. All right. You want to make sure where it's coming from. Is it the same buckets that you would have in a game? Or is it the buckets that you're trying to get out of this practice? Here's another example. Here, this is the warm-up before a game. All right, take a look at this warm-up before a game. What was interesting to me is, again, because this is using the accelerometer data as well, we can actually get jump load from this as well. Because, and you can see, obviously, before the game, warm-up before a game, a lot of jump shots by this player. Twice as much as any of these practices around it. All right, so again, is this guy now going into this game even more fatigued because of all these jumps? And it's a question. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying this is how you use the data. This is what we want to do with the data. Start picking it apart and trying to understand what we can get out of it. It's a lot more than just a load number, right? Even more than just our intensity number. We want to break down the number as well. We were finding in the NBA, guys were doing shoot-arounds that they were having the same mechanical loads in their shoot-around as they were in the game, all right? So, and these were starters. Most of that mechanical load, though, was coming from jumps data here, not the same as they would in a game. So, but the bottom line is they were still doing the same load twice in the day. So you can get away with that probably in October and November at the beginning of the season, but do you still want to be doing twice the loads when you get closer to the end of the season? Is that going to start increasing fatigue? Again, these are questions. I'm not telling you that this is right or wrong. I'm just saying these are things that this type of data. This is what we're doing. This is the conversations we are having with the teams. And is this what you want out of this practice? If it is, that's great. Just want them to understand that we can pick apart the practice a lot more than just a load number. So that's how we take apart mechanical load. And we'll go back to the PowerPoint. And so with that being said, let's just take a look at the actual demands of the game over the season. So what I just did right there was looking at demands of the games at the practice level. You can actually even take it to another level with that and do that at the drill level. So then we can find, are there drills that are going to give me the intensity levels that I want in a game? We had found it, again, beginning of the season with some new teams, we were finding some players never, even in a drill, we could say in a 2 or 3 minute portion of a drill, never got to the intensity that they did in a game. So are our drills, or better question, which drills are actually helping us in developing a player for that game scenario and the demands of that game? So again, we're taking the loads, breaking it down even more, but then we're actually taking it one more step further and breaking it down into the drill level as well. That being said, then we're going to look at the big picture for the season. So when you're looking at this, we're also want to look at what's the demands during the season. So one example that I have up on the screen here is that the regular season, the playoffs, and the NBA are completely different. Okay, let me explain what we have up here. So the gauges up at the top, the 74 and the 74 here, these are gauges for the top 6 players on a team. Okay, this is a team I just pulled out. Okay, top 6 players from that team average, those 6 players, account for 74% of the mechanical load of the team, of the entire team. All right, they account for 74%. This is in the regular season. Okay, total distance, again, 74% of the total distance is done by the top 6 players on the team. Right? In the playoffs, looking at the gauges just below that, in the playoffs, that jumps to 85%. So again, the same top 6 guys now are doing 85% of the work. Distance as well as mechanical load. What's that's telling me? Obviously, it's very clear. Everybody knows what's happening is the bench gets shorter. All right. But the demands for our players are getting higher. So my top guys, who are the ones I need to have in the best shape in the playoffs, I want to make sure that we are preparing them for those playoff level loads. Okay. So we see this. The 74 is the average for the NBA during the regular season. And we have seen it as high as 89%, 89% of the work done by the top 6 players, okay, in the playoffs. That's a big jump. So again, all that means is the bench is getting shorter, all right? Now, everybody talks about the intensity of the playoffs. The playoffs are so intense. Well, yes, they are, because you win or you go home. It's that simple. So there's a lot of intensity going on, but it's outside intensity, meaning that there's a lot more stress on it. The game means a lot more. Every possession means a lot more. But what our term of intensity, how fast you're moving, the mechanical load divided by minutes, so the number of accelerations and decelerations per minute, feet per minute, all those numbers actually go down. So our mechanical load in the playoffs actually slow down. So if you take a look now at the tables that I have here, again, at the top here is the regular season. And in the regular season, you can see what the average minutes for these 6 players is: 34, 33, 31. Down here below is the playoffs. You can see, just like we talked about, and that confirms the gauges above, is that now these players are playing more: 42, 41, 39. This is the number of minutes that they're playing. Okay. And if the number 6 player was doing 23, he's actually dropped down to 17. So again, bench gets shorter. These guys are working much harder. They're covering more distance. Here's the distance, 2.2 miles in the regular season, 2.5, 2.7 in the playoffs. Okay. So again, working harder. But if we look at our intensity levels, the intensity levels 32, 35, 35. Here, 31, 34, 33. Intensity is slowing down. Why? Because they're playing more minutes. You can't handle those loads for longer periods of time. Okay, we looked at this data over the last few years, and what we've been seeing is that the teams that are trying to maintain their intensity levels. I'm going to talk about performance pace in just a few minutes, a little bit more detail, but that's a metric that we use even more in the playoffs. The performance pace, which is mechanical intensity here, is part of that important performance pace. That number drops, okay, in the playoffs, just like we see here. If a team tries to maintain that pace or that intensity, 9 out of 10 times they actually lose that round. Or they go into the next round and they lose very quickly in the next one. You could see a bigger drop in their performance pace. Or it's hard to say, but we could give it as a possibly could be fatigue is fine catching up to them. Again, higher loads, intensities are dropping. Okay, can't maintain those loads. But if you're trying to maintain those intensities, we see that teams do not make it as well in the playoffs. So what that's telling me is like, I need to train you. I need to focus on, especially again, just going to use the NBA as my example right now, but I want to focus on right now that in January, February, March, again, playoffs, normally, obviously this year it's different. We don't know what's going to happen with playoffs, but normally the playoffs are mid-April. So what we really want to do is then January, February, March, we want to prepare them for the playoff levels. So does that mean every once in a while I need to be at playoff level during the regular season? Yes, so I am ready. And then if I want to play at a higher intensity and maintain that intensity, I need to prepare for that. Is that in practices? Is that in playing guys at games and trying to keep the pace up that you want? Yes. So there's different ways to do it, but that's what this data is going to help us understand. And we look at, what is our ultimate goal in the playoffs? Because really that's what everybody's working for. I don't care what sport it is what you're trying to develop and make sure that you're going to get into the playoffs and then be peaking for the playoffs, not burnt out for the playoffs, and not having to shorten the bench and realize that you don't have the energy for that short bench. So that's our ultimate goal is what we're trying to do. So again, just taking a quick look backwards, we want to look at it like example of the mechanical load. If I go back for a second, we talk about the mechanical load, and then we break down the mechanical load. Then what we do is we break it down by the drill. Then we got to look at the big picture over the season as well. So there's a lot more that we do to it, what to do with the data, than just saying, okay, here's an acute to chronic, here's just the number, this is the number of the load that we need just for that time period. But we want to break it down a lot more than that. We want to plan and understand what is our ultimate goal at the end. Okay, so we talked about this just briefly at the end of the last talk, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about clustering now. So the next phase also is to, again, look at multiple metrics. Understand what metrics that you want to do. Clustering algorithms to compare and contrast different playing styles and group players according to different metrics and categories. Okay? We're clustering to try to understand. I used this example in my first talk, load management, where we had mechanical load and yards catch. So depending on how productive that player is, how much work did he have to do to be that productive, right? So I'm going to give you some more examples of clustering. So in the clustering, one that we like to use a lot is accelerations. So people talk about max accelerations, and again, that's just a nice number. It's like, okay, that's the highest acceleration you can hit. How do we use it? What do we get out of accelerations more than just a number to say that this guy can hit that number, right? So that's what we want to talk about, and we use that in our clustering. So in this cluster, okay, what we're trying to do now is start to bring in some additional metrics other than just our load metrics that we had. I talked about this a little bit at the end of our last talk, but power and pace, okay? But power, what we're looking for out of power is we're looking at that max acceleration that I just showed you, but we're also going to look at their max speed. So is this player powerful? Meaning, can he explode? Does he have a high acceleration? Can he generate and create a high speed as well? So that's a powerful athlete. That's what we're looking for in power. Our pace, mentioned it just briefly a few minutes ago, but here I have it in writing for you. Mechanical intensity, high accelerations per minute, and distance per minute. What I'm looking for is that guy who moves the most, the fastest on the court, not the guy who is the fastest, that has the highest one speed that he has. I'm looking for the guys that move a lot and are very active. So in this case here, okay, if you look at the chart that I have here for the centers, right? The average pace down here for this player, and then we have average power on the side, right? So pace, guys down at this end here are very fast. They move a lot, right? Down here, they don't move too much. Power up here, they're fast. They can explode, right? The guys at the top. So just looking at the difference between these two players, these are two centers in the NBA. We have one center, okay, moves a lot. He covers a lot of distance, accelerates, decelerates per minute, a lot, mechanical intensity, and even possibly might do some high accelerations as well, sprinting down the court. All right, so this guy moves a lot. This guy here, this is another guy, same position in the NBA. All right, center, doesn't move it hardly at all. Not a very explosive guy. All right, probably a bigger center. Okay, doesn't move a lot, so his pace is very slow, and he's not very explosive. All right, so a few different things you want to look at. All right, if you're looking for different players and you're trying to match up for different players, is number 2 going to be able to match up against number 1 in a game? Is number 1 going to be able to just blow by him? You got to look at for matchups. Also understanding training. Is there some reason number 2 has these lower numbers? Is it something that we need to train? Do we want him to play that way? So that, again, pull this out to understand what do we do with the data. We're using this type of clustering to understand how am I going to train a player, or how am I going to match up a player as well. So there's a lot more that you can get out of these simple metrics that we have over here, but combining them and clustering. So, and if I'm trying to trade for somebody as well, if number 1 goes down, I need to trade for him. I better try to get somebody in this red cluster up here. I don't want to trade and get somebody down here in this green cluster. He's not going to fit in that position that you have. All right. And again, is there a reason why these guys move a lot but aren't very explosive? Well, maybe these guys down the bottom, we need to work on that. So that's how we use the clustering. That's how we use these metrics the next level. Another example of the clustering here, what we're doing here is now we have forwards, and you can look to see that, all right, in this case here, I have 2 that actually have the same pace. So these guys move pretty much the same as far as intensity, as well as, mechanical intensity, feet per minute, and their high-end accelerations are pretty similar, but they're in the same line here as pace. But what makes a difference is now what we can do is start picking it apart. Pick those 3 metrics apart, and you can see probably the one thing that he's not, this number 2 is not, his high-end accelerations are not very strong. Because again, why is number 1 up so high? Because he's powerful. He's got high accelerations, a high max acceleration, and a high max speed. So the difference between these 2 guys here is acceleration or power. So now I got two guys that if I looked at only pace, only, I'd say, hey, these guys are very similar. Well, now I look at apart and I can pick apart the pace and go, oh, no, you know what? Guys, maybe they move a lot and we have to train them to be able to move that much, but guy here can explode a lot more. Again, do I need to train number two to do that? Can he handle to do that? If they were matched up again, is number one going to blow by number two? These are types of things that we can start mixing and matching and understanding the metrics much more than just here's a load. This is we're telling us a little bit more about the player. You as coaches can understand how you need to either train them or working with the head coach, the position coaches, and understanding, okay, how do I work on this for this player? What do I need to improve on this player? And of course, it could be always used for um, trading players or picking up players. The other thing that we use this data for a lot is return to play. All right, probably one of the most important things, and probably where a lot of people focus the most at first, because it's the easiest to focus on, meaning that you're dealing with one, maybe two players at a time, opposed to the entire team. So understanding, can I get this player back to where he was before the injury? All right, so hopefully we have some good baseline data to start off with, but then as we build up, so our baseline data would be the dotted lines here, right? And we're breaking it down a few different ways here. So, and again, you can do it any way that you like, but we're looking at your mechanical intensity, just the average mechanical intensity. We're looking at the max 7-day period for that intensity, and then we're just looking for that one session. So we're trying to break it down 3 different ways. So you got the mean mechanical intensity here, you've got the 7-day here, and then you got the max for that session. Okay, get this example here, 84% of his max that he's our target that he's hit so far. Right, that's the first month. Over time, his max is actually jumping up 97%, doing really well. Eventually, after 3 months, he can hit the top numbers that he was before. That's what we're looking for. This can be mechanical intensity, it could be just high-end acceleration, it could be speed. What metric do we want to use in here to truly understand the demands that this athlete, and he is improving? So over time, we want to see, pick out a metric, pick out a few metrics. Again, we use pace. We could use the pace as an overall metric, but then start picking apart the pace from that mechanical intensity, high accelerations, feet per minute, breaking it apart a little bit. Which ones are improving and which ones are not, right? Again, what is important for that player to be improving? But being able to monitor that over time is extremely important. And to understand a good baseline where they were to begin with is even more valuable. So return to play is where we use this a lot. And I think that will continue to be used, because if you have a good baseline for your athlete, then you'll know exactly, is he the injury taken care of? Let's just say if it was a knee injury, therapists are saying he's 100%, he can do it. The old benchmark was different things like Cybex and things like that. Well, that's one way of looking at it. Here, we're going to look, can he move? Can he do the explosive power that we need, the change of direction that we need, that he's done before in the games? That's what we're really seeing when we return to play, opposed to some, he can lift. So in the asymmetry of the lifts are great. Well, that's maybe a benchmark for being able to start training, but this is more of a benchmark, can he actually play? All right. We also talk about that in our conditioning as well, because we want to make sure that our conditioning is that way as well. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit more time with this one. This chart that I'm showing right now is called our training program. I'm going to talk about this a lot more in the next session, which that will be the conditioning one, which will start Thursday at this time, Thursday. We'll be going into this. I'll go into even more detail with this chart at that time. But what we're seeing here is I will, in the blue are 4 different players, right? Could be a guard, forward, um, shooting guard, and maybe center, right? So the blue are 4 different starters. The guys that are shaded in the gray around the blue, in this case here, I'll use this one in the middle, okay? So guys that are shaded, these are guys that actually step in and play for that starter, all right? So what I'm going to do is I want my benchmark is going to be the starters. That's what I'm trying to do. Is I am trying to have a benchmark for my bench players to come in for a starter. We call this the Dellavedova effect. A few years ago, Matt Dellavedova, when he was at Cleveland before he came back, when they were in the playoffs, and he was the backup to Kyrie Irving. All right. So Matt Dellavedova had to step in. Irving went down in the playoffs. Matt had to step in and played a very high loads and for him, very high intensity. He's a very high intensity guy, plays at 100 miles an hour all the time, and he's trying to maintain that in the playoffs. Okay, but he was been playing the whole season at practice or bench loads. Okay, so that's why I want to use the benchmark. So let's just say if this blue is Kyrie Irving, I want to make sure that his subs are going to be able to step in if he does get injured, right? So what this is saying here is that the average game for my guys in blue, it's right here, under the average. Okay? So in this 10-day period, this player in blue here played 2 of his games at average. Played 1 game, 0.1, I'm sorry, 0.5 standard deviation below his average, a whole standard deviation below 2 games, and down here with 0. He can play anything above his average, which we would call playoff levels. Again, going back to what I talked about earlier, that we know that in the playoffs, the loads for the players go higher. Okay? We know that the bench gets smaller, loads go higher. In this case here, in this 10-day window, he did not have any games above his standard deviation. All right. That's why I'm saying maybe in January, February, March, we should see some games in there so we are preparing them for the playoffs. This player did not. The player down here, he's had 3 average and he had 1 that's very high. Right. So he did have a playoff 1. This player here, he had 1 that was a standard deviation above as well. So he had 1 playoff level. Then we have a very high playoff level. We give 2 different variations of that. So again, just looking at the starters and seeing if they are first hitting those numbers. Then second thing that we're looking at here is how about my guys that have got to step in? All right, guys that have a lot of numbers down here, 3, 4, 5. These guys here are not playing. All right, they're playing very little. All right, so I need to do extra things for them off, not non-game, either off court or in their drills, but to mimic and make sure that they're at least in the average on their practices, if not sometimes hitting in this playoff level as well. So what we've done, and that's what I'll talk about a lot more in the next session, starting Thursday, is all right, how do we take these and then design conditioning programs or drills and programs for them? What type of programs do these guys have to do to make sure that they're ready to step in for a starter? So we use this training report for 2 different ways. Number 1, we want to make sure the starters are getting some playoff levels. All right, need to get some playoff levels games. Okay. Number 2, we want to make sure that the bench players are also giving enough work off the court. And it could be, because I know that, again, using the example of the NBA, that in the NBA, these guys down here, all right, the ones with high numbers and these low, that means they're not playing a lot in games. Those guys are probably getting a lot of practice with their coaches, their drill coaches for sure. but it's probably just the volume. It's not intensity. It's not game type of level. So that's what we're trying to do is like, we're going to talk about how do we fill this in and get to some game intensity levels using the data that we have to understand. It's like, okay, these guys can't be just doing a lot of basic drills or a lot of volume. We also have to get them to game levels. And when I'm talking game levels, we got to get to game levels of the guy that they're stepping in for. So those are the things that we really want to start looking at, looking a lot more into the next session on how to break those down and what the exercises or the demands are from our training program 1, 2, and 3. Start off with, I just want to at least give you an understanding. It's like, that's what we're starting to do. We want to start looking at breaking down 2 things with this. Number 1, who, what the starter look like? Are they getting the demands that they need to be prepared for the playoffs? And number 2, is the bench guys. It's, if nothing else, what's happening, the coaches that I work with, this gives them something to show their coaches that, hey, this is what this guy's doing. This is what he's not doing. This is what we can suggest, not just the straight minutes that the head coach might use. All right. So that being said, what I'm going to do is just finish up about quarter of. I'm going to do 3 takeaways and then take some questions at the end here. So please send any questions in the Q&A there. And I got a chat here. Oops, sorry. I'm going to go back 1 second on 3 takeaways. 3 takeaways. All right. Are your practice training you for the games? Again, what are the demands of the sport? Do you understand the demands? Years ago, we used to do it from VO2 testing and then design programs from there. Now we can do it from actual monitoring of the players with either Kinexon or whatever game systems that they're using. We want to monitor that and look at it and design your practices around the actual games, as well as any of your conditioning that you're going to do. And is there different phases in your season? Are you training for all the phases? And the example I used in the NBA, where we have our playoffs are completely different than our regular season. And even in that, we see even at when I was talking about performance pace, we actually see the first 20 games of the season, the performance pace being very high. So can the players maintain this very high pace? And we see that after about 20 games in the regular season, they start to drop down. And that's where it goes down. So understanding there's a different phase for the beginning of the season for the NBA as well. Is there in your sport? Is there in your leagues? Is there a difference from the beginning of the season, middle of the season, and then you got playoffs? All right. Are there different types of phases that you have to train for and be prepared for to be able to peak at the end? And then again, looking at how you use your loads and intensities to design your training. We're going to look at things more in the power. We're going to look at pace. We're going to look a lot deeper than just that simple load number. We're going to look at breaking that load down into buckets as well.